Hello, how's it going, folks? Today I wanted to talk about how we talk about video games. Whether you're a casual fan of games talking to your friends, a professional critic writing reviews, or a game developer, maybe you're writing a GDC talk, putting together a PowerPoint or something like that. Chances are, whoever you are, you enjoy video games. That's why you're here. You want them to be taken seriously on some level. So it can be useful to learn how to talk about them in a way that isn't just repeating the same tired terminology and just saying all the same things that everybody else is saying all the time. You get that when you talk with your friends about video games, right? Or pop culture or movie reviews, TV shows, anything, right? Like you hear people just repeating and parroting the same talking points, and you realize you're not really having a conversation. And certainly if you're writing a video game review, you're not going to get away with that. You're not going to be taken seriously. You're not going to have worthwhile things to say. So here are some of the things that I've sort of accumulated, the thoughts that I've had about this over the course of 10 years as a professional games journalist and somebody who has written a book about video games and contributes chapters and essays to the occasional, like I wrote a chapter about Guitar Hero for um, HarperCollins put out this coffee table book recently with Lost and Cult called Haptics to Joysticks or Joysticks to Haptics, the history of the video game controller. And I did sort of the Rock Band Guitar Hero chapter in that, for instance. And if you're going to write about games, you need specific tools to talk about them, a framework, a critical framework probably, but also just like what do we call these things without getting too vague? Like when I started my career as a professional video game writer at Kill Screen in what was it, April of 2016. So 10 years ago, um, the word gameplay was banned. All right. You couldn't say gameplay in your writing. And that's something that stuck with me. And you'll hear like variations of gameplay wherever you go, whoever you're talking to, whatever you're reading. You're gonna see words like gameplay, the loop, the gameplay loop, and things like that. So keep an eye out for that kind of thing, that trap where it's almost meaningless, right? So one of the first ways that I learned to discuss video games in writing, like whether I was working on a book or writing a review. I reviewed Friday the 13th for Rolling Stone as a very young, inexperienced critic. And um, I took a page out of Kieran Gillen. This is old stuff at this point. This is like 15 years ago. There was an essay or a blog post written by. Now he's a comics writer, but back in the day he was more of a games journalist. Kieran Gillen, writing for like Rock Paper Shotgun and things like that, and he wrote the New Games Journalism Manifesto. And the idea was that kind of like I was saying a minute ago about gameplay or whatever, how do we talk about video games, especially with writing and criticism, in a way that is meaningful? Well, you tell stories about your gameplay experience. Roger Ebert famously always talked about film criticism was a subjective art. There is the capital I, the pronoun I is the viewpoint of a film critic, a TV critic, and yeah, a video game critic. Games are not objectively good, games are not objectively bad, unless, you really feel that way. But, basically, I played the game, I played it this way, I had this experience. I had a particular group of friends that I played Friday the 13th the game with. I got to Diamond 5 rank in Halo 5, grinding it out on Friday night or whatever the case might be. I built this kind of character in Destiny 2, or maybe you role played a certain character in Grand Theft Auto 5, some role play server online. Maybe you built something particular with your brother in Minecraft. Maybe you developed a Roblox game prototype. Maybe you built a Mario Maker course that you were really proud of. If you're writing about a game like whatever the case might be, Fortnite, Mario Maker, uh, whatever the game is that you're covering or you're talking about with friends, try to tell stories about your gameplay experience. If you're talking about the game like Marathon, like Bungie's Marathon or an extraction shooter like that, you're going to have some really high stakes moments, some crazy things happen. And if you can remember those stories and you're going to have memorable experiences in a game like Destiny, Marathon, Fortnite, whatever, you're probably going to have some crazy high stakes moments. Maybe you're going to get some gameplay footage clipped and help you remember, but tell those stories, those meaningful stories. Somebody called you a really harmful word in a video game. That's like the famous example. Um, is like somebody heard a racial slur and it applied to they it was racially offensive to them specifically in Star Wars multiplayer game, and that became a very famous essay. Um, Part of the new games journalism, and what was a big example of that. The essay was called like "Bow N word," and so it was a very subjective, personal, intense, um, you know, violent experience that this player had, um, unique to an online world in which players don't always have the context about who the other player is. It wasn't they didn't know who they were playing against, right? So it could have been a white guy getting called like the N slur on the other side, and they were typing it in text, and it becomes, basically racial violence in the context of that person's subjective experience of this online multiplayer game. So when you play a game, maybe whatever baggage you bring to a video game, maybe you're a parent, maybe you have a certain disability, maybe you really love a certain type of game, maybe you think you really hate a certain type of game. You bring all that stuff of who you are as an individual. You bring a point of view, you bring a bag of life experiences to a game. A game is an intensely complex, participatory, personal work of art a lot of the time. So, like, who you are is going to steer how you think about games, the choices you make within a game that's interactive. Um, and so you tell those stories that you collect in your life as a gamer. And, number two, the next big point I want to make, write about your honest feelings. Whether you're talking to your friends, whether you're talking to strangers online, or maybe you're writing a professional review for the IGNs of the world or the Kotakus of the world. The most important thing a journalist's job entails is telling the truth. Okay. So, uh, for you, your honest feelings are the truth. So, if you felt that a character was insensitive to a certain marginalized group and played into stereotypes, and you're a member of that marginalized group and you have something to say about it that you feel is meaningful and a unique perspective on that's got to be a huge lightning rod for your feelings about that game. Or maybe you had a really good experience with I always think about Wind Waker. I played Wind Waker right after my grandmother died. And so Link's grandmother and that relationship that they have, it's small, it's minimalist. I'm projecting a lot of my meaning onto that minimalist game, or the minimalist relationship within that game. But things like going back for the soup as the elixir that heals Link in his travels, that really was meaningful to me at a time when I really was sad about not having a grandma anymore. This was 12 years ago, okay, something like that. But Wind Waker was maybe like my most profound experience with a Zelda game, as since playing the first Ocarina as a kid, right? Playing Zelda for the first time as a kid. Obviously, you can't. There's something special about that, but like being an adult and having this processing my grief through Wind Waker, you know, that's going to conjure a lot of feelings in a person, and it did. And so I couldn't write an essay about Wind Waker without discussing that. Okay. And so, whatever your honest feelings about a game are, maybe you really hated a mission. Maybe you really hate the library in the Halo Combat Evolved. Okay. A lot of people say they hate that mission. So, why do you hate it? Be honest. Explain yourself. Okay. You hate it. So, that's a bad mission, according to you. And so, pick apart your feelings, interrogate yourself, right? Look inward and ask, why does this suck so much? Is it oppressively dark? Does it not fit the logic and flow of the level design in other parts of Halo? I don't know. I think that level's aged okay, but there are some like annoying little snaggy bits in it that can be not so fun to play. Point number 3, though. Okay, so to that point, no, point number 3, use granular specificity as often as possible. Because games are complicated, they're made up of these multitudes of systems working in concert to achieve a desired effect, right? Creating this experience for the player. You're bumping up against all these obstacles, or the game designer wants to achieve a desired effect or an emotional effect. BioWare likes to give you this fantasy of you're the only hero, the chosen hero who can save the world from utter annihilation or whatever. How does that illusion, how do they craft that illusion at the level of the pixel, at the level of what the buttons and keys are mapped to? How does the sound design impact the tactical camera view, or whatever the case may be? You need to think about the smallest little details, you know, that you can conjure into words. You want to be using that toolbox, okay? Like, um, all the little moving parts within the game, you know, it's hard for anyone who didn't play the game to know what you're talking about unless you can really discuss that stuff with a fine pen, right? And if you didn't develop a game, then you're not going to know how it works unless you're a critic who's like very dialed in to that, or play up, maybe an esports competitor, competitive player, a speed runner who's like very dialed into a specific game series or like style of like sub genre type thing, right? Like, um and it can be useful if you're a critic to know those granular details about um what's going on under the hood in terms of D&D rule sets, or like when I played Five Nights at Freddy's, like that game doesn't really tell you how the characters, well, they give you clues about how the characters behave, but like really, if you want to be good at a game like Five Nights at Freddy's, I think other players are going to share tips and tricks with you, and it's going to help you like understand. Oh, he like he's gonna run at you, and like you're dead if he runs through the door. So like you're not gonna get a chance to see him outside the door. You have to hit the button and slam it shut while he's like coming down the hallway, because Foxy's like really fast and the other guys have other behavioral patterns. And again, if you're talking about games, or especially if you're like writing about them as a critic or a developer, you want to look for those patterns of behavior and like try to understand them like a game designer or a dev. This is really hard if you've never like interviewed a game developer, um, or like tried to make a game yourself. And I'll probably do other videos about that, about like interviewing game developers and how you can like learn more about game design and stuff like that. But, I'm a bit of a dilettante when it comes to this stuff, or dilettante. Like I dabble in a bit of like everything to do with games because I love them, and you can learn no end of things, and most of it is over my head, but I care about appreciating them the way like an art critic would want to understand like the process of painting, right, or something like that. So um if you think the movement, the subtleties of the movement and controls and the gunplay in Halo 5 Guardians is better than Halo Infinite or better than Halo 3, you know, you need to have some vocabulary to like defend that position, right? So I have tragically little vocabulary when it comes to something like a fighting game, like Super Smash Brothers. I'm not going to be able to like have a conversation about which Super Smash Brothers game is the best. I'm going to have no idea. Okay. It's whichever one has the coolest model of Fox McCloud in it. Okay. That's my answer. But like, um, I could talk about Halo multiplayer all day and talk about why Halo 5 is one of my favorites, why Halo 2 is one of my favorites, and things like that, and why 3 is really good now, but it wasn't back in the day. And, um, I could have a lot. Friends and I have had indeed long conversations about why, Halo 5's pistol was really awesome and why the sidekick in Halo Infinite is just kind of like a nothing burger kind of weapon that is not inspiring to use. And so that's why, like in Halo Infinite, for example, the pro players are all running around with DMRs or bandits or whatever. So instead of the Halo 5 Magnum. Um, Now, don't assume that you understand a game mechanic or design intention personally, because game studios are notoriously opaque. And what they say is always kind of suspect. And like, it's a game is the result of like dozens or thousands of people, all these happy accidents. Things are rigged to work in absurd ways. You can sort of like gesture at an explanation. You can draw your own conclusions about like you're speculating about like I think the intention of this level design was to make me feel this and I felt this, and like I think this is how things were working under the hood. But chances are, if you're talking about like a AAA game, like I don't know, an Insomniac Games title like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, like something like that, or 007 First Light, you're going to need a team of like a dozen developers in the room with you, explaining why something works the way it does, and they're all going to have like contrasting viewpoints and explanations, and they're all going to understand game development in a dozen different ways. Okay, so like basically if you're writing about game history or a review or game development, it's always like that oral history format, which I kind of favored in my career as a games journalist, when I did a lot more of that. You're always going to have these different ideas of why things work, why they don't work, and what the original game designer intention was. And some programmer who came from like the tech software world into the game developer world and help build the engine out, and like they'll have explanations for why physics were broken and it was sort of jury rigged to work through these means, and like there was a memory issue with the console back then. So it's such a fascinating medium, much like film, the craft of filmmaking, or writing a novel or poetry. Like there's no end of conversations you can have about this stuff. And like a great poem, like I don't know, the stuff you study like in a college poetry class, like you don't get like five reviewers talking about a poem and then that's just like the final word on that poem for all of human history. Like it goes on forever and it's debated endlessly. Okay, like Shakespeare and stuff. And if a game is really good enough, and I think that there have been some really meaningful, rich, beautiful, quote unquote, capital I important games made in history. I think of What Remains of Edith Finch. I think of Minecraft. I think of Tetris. I think of Super Mario Brothers 3. I think of um, Destiny 2. I think of Night in the Woods. I think of Halo Combat Evolved. I think of Resident Evil whatever your favorite Resident Evil is, I think, there are games that are worth talking about and discussing and critiquing and analyzing the way that we talk about a good TV show or the way that we talk about novels or poetry. But again, you have to be able to talk about these things in a way where you're not just repeating the same things that you've heard some YouTube pundit, like, some random guy on the internet said these 5 things about it, and so those are the 5 things I'm gonna remember about the game and repeat ad infinitum forever. Um, Make an argument for why you don't like something. Okay, so this is a big pet peeve of mine. People speak in, like, political dog whistles now, and I don't think that they even realize that they're doing it. So, like, I was recently in a multiplayer lobby. And they seemed like nice enough guys. They seemed like normal, cool guys. But the topic of GTA 6 came up, and there was like this comment made about blue and purple haired devs, right? Look at the people who made GTA 5, and then look at the GTA 6 devs, and a lot of blue and purple hair in that room. Or, people talk about like woke or, the Sweet Baby Inc. Boogeyman. Okay, like, let's just say for the sake of argument that you're right about a game being bad, but you are using these reasons as why you think it's bad. You're going to sound like a sheep without an original thought in your head. Okay? Let's say for a second, for the sake of argument, that we agree politically on something or whatever, or we agree on the game. That doesn't matter. Okay? uh, you know, Forget all that stuff. It's like, why do you think, Grand Theft Auto such and such is bad? Why do Vice City is better than San Andreas? San Andreas is better than 4, whatever. Why do you think that? It's not just because, you know, woke or not woke. Forget the woke, anti-woke thing. That is such a it tells me that you are threatened by women, or threatened by people of color, or threatened by the thought of uh, queer relationships, and like, get over that. Like, holy hell, like, forget that stuff. Talk about the game. Talk about why you don't like the politics in the game. There you go. Go to the text of the game and explain why you don't like something is doing politically. Okay. Talk about your personal politics and the politics you bring to the game as you, the subjective audience. Okay. Forget what the devs' politics are. There are a lot of devs whose games I love, and their politics, I think, are totally not just antithetical to what I like. They don't align with the game that they made. So, like, that happens a lot. Forget the what you think about the devs because you heard that so and so consulted on the game for 5 minutes. Forget that. Talk about the text of the game, how the game made you feel, and, be honest, be direct. Be honest with yourself, and, like, say why you didn't like the thing, okay? And like I said, okay, kill vague nonsense like gameplay, the loop, mechanics, graphics. Don't obsess over consumer talk like performance, frame rates, resolution, fidelity. Talk about art direction. Talk about textures, colors, and what it says. Like, when you look at, The Wind Waker, it makes you feel a pretty strong reaction to that art style, right? And how does that contrast with the art style in, say, what is it, Blood of the Dawn Walker or whatever, like that new vampire open world RPG coming out? Much grittier, darker, or Elden Ring, Dark Souls 3, whatever your poison. The point is like, games can look a lot of different ways. It's not just, oh, the frame rate's really high, oh, the graphics are really good, or oh, these people look so naturalistic and the girls are sexy or not sexy or whatever, right? Like, what's the art direction doing Is it trying to craft a graphical, kinda weird, hyper real looking game like Marathon? Is it trying to give you the feeling of like an innocent little cartoon like Wind Waker and kinda take you back to, an earlier, more playful time in your sort of life or whatever? Like, or is it trying to make you feel like you're in this kinda gritty Game of Thrones, world where life is hardship and life is suffering and there is no justice, and like why is that, and there's vampirism, and how does the art direction reinforce the story, the characters, the feelings that you feel while you're playing it, um don't talk about like, oh, it's boring, oh, it's empty, oh, it's woke. I like if the frame rate is too choppy or too low, yeah, it might be worth talking about. But in general, that stuff is probably not all that notable. If a developer is telling a story about something like a hot button topic, like surveillance, um, one of my favorite essays or reviews I've ever read of a game was Will Parton's review of Watch Dogs 2, which is a game that has really gotten appreciated pretty well over time. But like back then, he wrote a great review about how it's kind of ironic that Ubisoft is putting all this software based surveillance collecting player user data into a game that is all about surveillance and how surveillance turns society and the cityscapes that we live in into like prisons, right? Like, the panopticon, or like something more recent, if a developer's making a science fiction game with like androids or artificial intelligence or robots, what does it say if that developer puts generative AI imagery into their game? Does it reinforce the themes that they're trying to put forth? If they have like a message in the game or a feeling that they're trying to evoke through their story, does having AI slop in the game back that message up, or does it undermine it somehow? And unpack that, why do you feel the way that you do? Point number 10 in my notes. The critic Matt Zoller cites, who he wrote an incredible book about the TV show Mad Men called Mad Men Carousel, one of my favorite books of the last, I don't know, however many years. He has a great bit of advice for critics, and it's just write the parts you tell your friends. If they ask you about a movie, or in this case, a game, right? Like leave out all the fluff about frame rates. Okay, what is notable? If your buddy says, "Hey, I saw there's a new Titanfall shooter called Impulse with mechs and fast movement and wall running," what would I tell them about it? What do I tell my friend in a 30-minute Discord conversation? Anything I said in that conversation is probably fair game to put in a written review if I was going to write a review for, I don't know, rogerebert.com or one of the other sites that I've written for in the past. But if something is so boring, you wouldn't even mention it to your friend because it's like about your your refresh rate on your monitor, or something to do with like matchmaking that was already patched by the time. A lot of reviewers, they'll get a game early and the developers will be like, we have a list of known issues and these are going to be patched out before the game even launches. And like, a lot of YouTube reviewers want you to know that they got the game early, and they want to like really tear into a game for things that the developers are aware, not only aware of, but are usually fixed by the time the game's release date comes around. And so like games like Mass Effect Andromeda got tore to shreds for these facial animations, right, back in the day. And by the time the game launched, the facial animations were largely fixed, or at least like addressed heavily by the developers and patched, but the damage had been done. Like the footage had hit the internet, and I don't know. Um yeah, does that belong in a review? Stuff that a developer has said they're going to patch out, and then they do. I don't know. It's a hard thing with embargoed criticism, and the fact that game developers usually and publishers, I should say publishers, don't usually give critics a lot of time to play a game and review it. There's a lot of crunch that happens there, and that's a big hot button issue. But anyway, I hope that this helps you think about how you talk about video games with your buddies or in a piece of writing. Maybe you're an aspiring games journalist, or maybe you're thinking about writing a book about a video game or video games plural. And it's like, how do you go from writing about other topics that you like to write about? Maybe you've written a thing about travel, like a travel book, or maybe you've written food criticism or about album, like music reviews, right? Or film reviews. How do you move into talking about video games? And it's really the same. It's like you want to know as much as possible about how the sausage is made if you can. You want to understand the game developer's intent, but you can never really fully grasp all of that all the time because games are made by thousands of people and in some cases, and the technology is over most people's heads. There's a lot of complexity. Game engines are complicated, and it's not as simple as like, oh, Frostbite, oh, Unreal, oh, old proprietary engine. It's not as simple as people make it sound. It never is. It's sure, it's good if you use a an engine that you licensed from Epic Games, but then you gotta, pay for that, or they take a cut of your profits and things like that. So and when you build your own proprietary engine from scratch for a specific game project, you can also tailor it to the specific needs of the game you're making. So a lot of indie devs like to make their own game engine. It's a whole can of worms. And basically, you should talk about the things that you understand. And if what you understand about a game that you're reviewing or talking about is your subjective, unique experience, maybe you had a bad interaction in a Destiny raid. I don't know, whatever the case may be. That's notable. What did you feel when you played a game? What did you take away from the game? What are you going to remember about it? What would you tell a friend? That's valid. Yeah. Anyway, I've uh, I've been writing for and about video games since 2013, and now I'm doing YouTube and Twitch and stuff. And I hope that this has been fun for you guys. So thanks so much for watching.